During the first months of the war, the Germans executed the Schlieffen Plan. They invaded Belgium, breaking the neutrality the country held. This invasion brought England into the war. Once the Germans made it through Belgium, they began to advance through France. To combat this, the French came up with a plan of attack called Plan 17. This marked the beginning of the Battle of the Frontiers. The first French offensive battle was in Alsace, called the Battle of Mulhouse, where the French retreated. The battles of Helen, Lorraine, Ardennes, Charleroi, and Mons followed, leading to a German advance into France. This was known as the Great Retreat. A couple of months later, there was a major battle called the Battle of Marne. This battle would decide the fate of Paris, as it was just a couple miles away. The British and French stood together against a German army for 4 days, until the Germans were eventually pushed back. This was a massive defeat for Germany and forced them to retreat. This began the race for the sea, which wasn't actually a race towards the sea. It was a plan where France and Germany tried to outflank each other to gain an upper hand from the north. Eventually, they went so far north they just ran into the English Channel, and the race was over. The next battle, the Battle of Ypres, was in Belgium. Both sides tried to gain land, and both failed. Unlike the battles that had come before, the Battle of Ypres was extremely long and was basically a battle of attrition. Both sides were exhausted, had little ammunition, and they had very low morale. Eventually, it became a stalemate, with neither side being able to make sufficient advancements. The next battle was the Battle of Verdun, 2 years after Ypres. This was also the longest battle of the war. Germans were the first to make a move stating they wanted to bleed France white. The Germans thought that if they attacked here, the French would defend it and waste as many troops as they needed to keep it safe. They were completely right. They fought from February of 1916 until December of that year. This became known as one of the bloodiest battles of the war, with the French losing over 360,000 troops and the Germans losing 340,000. The saving grace for the French was that the British won the Battle of Somme. This was the largest battle on the Western Front, with more than 3 million men fighting and 1 million men that were wounded or killed. Keep in mind, this might be called the Battle of Somme, but in reality, this was a multi-month siege of unrelenting fire. The British decided to divert some of the German forces away from Verdun, or else the French were going to fall. The diversion was successful. The Allies technically won the battle, since they did gain land, but only 6 miles at the expense of hundreds of thousands of lives. In April of 1917, the good old Americanos go to war with Germany. This was in perfect time for the Allies, as the Russians were about to concede from the war due to a revolution. With the Russians out of the war at this time, Germany went on a full front offensive on France. This marked the time of the Spring Offensive, where the Germans began to finally make gain. They launched the Second Battle of Marne, right outside of France. Luckily, fresh American troops pushed the Germans back. After this battle was over, the Allies began a counteroffensive drive known as the 100 Days Offensive. The Allies won so much land in this offensive that the Germans wanted a new Kaiser, and they did, the revolution. Their new government's main cause of action was to end the war and surrender, which they did on November 11th, 1918. Over on the Eastern Front, the Russians were quickly mobilizing, much faster than the Germans had anticipated, and much faster than the Schlieffen Plan had accounted for. For example, Russia managed to attack East Prussia within 10 days in August 1914, not 6 weeks, as was earlier assumed. Although, even with this hasty and unpredictable attack, the Russians were still defeated. Indeed, they had lost the battle, but not the war. This is due to the fact that Germany was forced to send a fraction of their warriors to East Germany in order to overcome the Russian troops, as was mentioned before. The combined forces of the Triple Entente were able to spread German forces thin, which would be the secret to defeating Germany's Schlieffen Plan. An integral piece of Russia's war plans was the splitting of Russian troops. By splitting their vast army, Russia was able to create 2 geographically adjacent forces, the Northern Front against Germany and the Southern Front against Austria-Hungary. Furthermore, as a result of the embarrassing defeat of the Russian forces that was the Russo-Japanese War, 2 waves of military reform transpired. The first of these concerned the organizational structure of both the Russian Army and Navy, leading to the creation of the State Defense Council and the main directorate of the General Staff. The next wave was the creation of military inspection services, the establishment of the Supreme Attestation Commission, and a reduction of the period of active military service. So basically, no old people. In order to win this war, Russian military strategists knew they had to take into account 3 key factors: distance, time, and the number of mobilized troops. To add on, Russia was surrounded by potential enemies such as Sweden to the north, Romania to the southwest, the Ottoman Empire to the south, on the other end of the Black Sea, and China and Japan to the east, not to mention Germany and Austria-Hungary to the west. In order to neutralize these threats and maintain control of their Baltic coast, the 6th Army and the 7th Army were formed in partnership with Russia's Black Sea Fleet. In addition, the Russian Caucasian Army was instrumental in holding their southern borders. Many of the Russian war plans took on defensive identities due to the amount of enemies they had to account for. In fact, the Russians were hopeful for a neutral Ottoman Empire upon the breakout of war in order to help alleviate military strain on their troops. However, some disadvantages to Russia's war plan included large distances and poorly planned logistical infrastructure. Yet, these disadvantages were greatly outweighed and silenced by the numerous advantages of Russian war plans. Nice.